My peoples, welcome to episode 9 of Rants and Randomness. I am Luvvie Ajayi, your host on the show where I talk about all things pop culture, things I'm loving, things I am side-eyeing, and having great conversation with really interesting people. I am here at Chicago Recording Company, bringing y'all the radio voice. On this episode, I'm talking about how Stacey Abrams has made history by winning the primary for Georgia governor. I'm ranting about how I don't trust those voice-activated home thingies. And I am spotlighting Red Table Talk, which is just amazing. And my guest is the incredible Glennon Doyle, who is a writer, speaker, and love warrior. So it's going to be a good show. Let's jump into it. So my feel good this week, I am just loving the fact that Stacey Abrams won the primary, the Democratic primary for Georgia governor, with more than 75% of the votes. Stacey made history as the first Black woman to be a major party nominee for governor and Georgia's first Black nominee, which is kind of crazy that it is 2018 and we still have these firsts. But hey, the firsts have to happen. But it's still side-eye worthy, especially for Democrats, for this being the first time. But all right, I understand that Georgia is a traditionally conservative state, and the Deep South has not had a Black governor since Reconstruction. So Stacey's Black girl magic. She's a former state house leader, small business owner, and romance novelist. And she wrote this dope piece. Was it for the New York Times or Washington Post? Where she talked about how she's $200,000 in debt and really how her struggles are everyone's struggles and how it shouldn't be the reason why people don't vote for her. Because here's the thing, we live in a country where most people have heavy debt, and it was a very vulnerable moment for her. I am rooting for her because the final vote is on November 6, 2018. Georgia, please show out for Stacey Abrams. Atlanta got a Black mayor now with Keisha Bottoms. Go ahead, Georgia. Get you a Black governor. So shout out to Stacey. Congrats to you for making history and rooting for you. Okay, so my rant this week is about those voice automated home things we all have. There's like the Google Home. There's the Amazon Alexa or Echo. I don't like them. And what's funny is I've had one of them. I don't remember which one. It was gifted to me for over a year. I've had this in my house, but it's been sitting in a box because I refuse to open it. I just don't think something that is listening to you should be trusted. Like something that is listening to you and acting on it should be trusted. And I think we're giving them too much credit. Here's why, right? So these things, for them to be activated, one of them, you be like, okay, Google, and then you say whatever you want it to say. For the Alexa, you say Alexa, and then you say whatever you want it to say, right? Hey, what's the closest pizza place that's open? Hey, is the watch fixing place open? I've always thought if it's activated when it hears its name, that means it's constantly listening to hear its name, which means it's constantly listening to you. And for me, that's kind of strange because a lot of times we put these devices in the places where we gather, our living rooms, our kitchens. And these are the times when we have our hair down, when we're not thinking about the world and we're having these candid conversations with our loved ones and our partners and our kids. And we're talking about doctor's appointments. We're talking about life savings. We're talking about the things that we might not be sharing with anybody else but the person we're talking to. And this device is right there, listening to all of it, just waiting for you to say Alexa or Google. I don't find that to be comforting at all. Like, I'm not saying I'm against smart homes or smart devices. I'm a techie. I have a whole lot of smart devices. But there's something different about like a programmable thermostat to a voice-controlled speaker that is constantly on. Also, like, one of the things that I've been reading, all the different times when it's all gone wrong. Like, recently I read a piece on how an Alexa device sent the audio of a couple that owned it randomly to one of their contacts. And how they found out is one of their contacts calls them and says, hey, you might want to turn off your Alexa. And they're like, why? He's like, because I know you were talking about hardwood floors 20 minutes ago. Now, imagine if they were talking about something more insidious or roasting him, for example. I'm like, how is it that all these bugs still exist in these things, too? Because they've been out for a while. Again, they're convenient to be able to, like, command this little thing to give you the information you need. We already have our phones constantly listening in terms of, like, our text messages are there, our web browser information is there. I don't think we need any more surveillance, and I feel like some of these things can surveil us too much. There was like a report about a hacker who successfully installed like a virus on an Amazon Echo and turned it into an always-on wiretap. Like, I'm just like, here's the thing. If I need to check the weather, I could search myself on any of my other devices. If I need to figure out where to go eat next, I could do a search. I think we might be getting a little bit too lazy if we're going to be depending on these voice control things to give us the information we need when what we're turning over is our privacy in a really concrete way. Because again, if this thing is always listening to hear its name, it means it is listening to you in case you say its name. What? It just makes me nervous. I'm not okay with it. I'm probably going to give away the one I have because, again, it's been sitting in a box for a year. And, I just want to feel secure in my private spaces. And I even stopped taking my cell phone into my bedroom at nighttime because I'm like, you know what? I don't need to have it right next to me at all times. It's like that. So I think privacy is still important, even though I am a member of Generation Social Media and I am pretty public about a lot of things. I still think we should do our due diligence to be as private as we possibly can, to keep our information as close to us as we possibly can. So, yeah, man, y'all will not see me with a voice-controlled speaker anytime soon. I don't even use Siri. I don't use Bixby. I don't use Google Assistant. I will Google. It's fine. What I am loving, my randomness spotlight, is the Red Table Talk, which is a Facebook Watch show hosted by Jada Pinkett-Smith with help from her daughter Willow and her mother, Adrienne Banfield-Jones. It started last month. It started last month. I think an episode drops a week. And they have these deep discussions about everything from body image issues to co-parenting and merging families to a one-on-one with somebody that Jada had been beefing with for the last 17 years. It's so vulnerable, so transparent, and just incredible. When I watched the body image one, they were all having a conversation about how at one point in time they've been unhappy with what their bodies look like. Willow especially was talking about how because she's so skinny, she always looks around and notices how her peers get so much attention from boys and she doesn't. And it's funny because I was like, I get you, Willow, because I was basically shaped like Willow when I was her age. Just really long, lean, and had nothing of note in terms of assets. And just hearing the advice that they gave her and just seeing the universal struggles in everybody. Like, Jada's mom, Adrienne, is stunning. This woman has a six-pack and she's in her 60s. And even she was talking about how she's not happy about certain body parts. And it drove home the idea that the grass is always green on the other side and we always coveting the things that we don't have, even though other people are coveting what we have. The show has so much heart. It's this multi-generational love fest and truth fest and just openness. It's kind of like you're gonna cry. Like, I cried a couple of the episodes. There's an episode where Jada was talking about loss, and she talked about her relationship with Tupac and how much it hurt her and how she wishes he was still here. It's basically like Chicken Soup for the Soul, 2018 edition. Red Table Talk is available on Facebook. You go to facebook.com/Red Table Talk. Catch up on the episodes. Fall in love with these women who are so open with each other in a way that I wish we could all be as open with each other. I think their relationship just feels so healthy, and I'm inspired by the content on the show. It's just so good, y'all. It's so good. Check out Red Table Talk on Facebook Watch. Oh my gosh. So I am so excited to have my next guest on Rants and Randomness. Her name is Glennon Doyle, and she is a member of my Together Wolfpack family. Hey, Glennon.
Hi, Luvvie. Hold on one second. My earphones just fell out.
See? Hilarious.
Sorry. All right, I'm back. How are you?
I am good. I am so excited to have you on this podcast because I'm like, man, people need to understand this here is my sister Glennon, okay?
Oh, that means so much to me. So much to me. You know, I've been following every move you've made for years. Just years. Just this morning, I just listened to the Francesca Ramsey podcast. She's amazing. Your guests have been phenomenal.
You know what's funny, Glennon? You're actually my first white guest.
I know. Do you think I don't know that?
You're my diversity. You're my diversity guest, Glennon.
I'm the token white one. I'm so excited. I've done that a lot lately. It makes me really happy. You got to check your box.
I have to check my quotas, Glennon. I have to do it. You know. I want to let people know how dope you are. Glennon is the author of the #1 New York Times bestseller. #1, y'all. Love Warrior. It's called Love Warrior. It's a 2016 Oprah's Book Club selection, as well as she's a bestseller and author of Carry On Warrior. And she's a founder and president of Together Rising, a nonprofit organization that has raised $9 million for women, families, and children in crisis. An activist, speaker, and thought leader, Glennon was named among OWN Network Super Soul 100 as one of 100 awakened leaders who are using their voices and talent to elevate humanity. And she lives in Florida with her wife and 3 children. Basically, Glennon is bae. Let me tell you guys why this woman is epic, and why I insisted. I was like, I have to have Glennon on this podcast. One, the reason why me and Glennon are able to even have the joking of like she's my affirmative action guest is this woman is plugged in a way where a lot of people who look like her are not. That's one. And two, her work has been really to snatch some of them back into formation. And you and I met at the Texas Conference for Women, like in 2015 or 2016. And when I saw Glennon, she was signing books right next to me. And I was like, oh my God, that's Glennon Doyle. I should go say hi. So I went and said hi. And then Glennon freaked out. And then we both freaked out at each other. And then we signed each other's books and we've been baes since.
Yep. And what you don't know about that is I was having an internal breakdown when I saw you. Because I was so excited. Yeah. And I think I've told you this. I mean, your book, I'm judging you. My sister doesn't read. And you know sister, right? You know
I love her,
well.
Amanda.
She loves you so much. Yeah. She doesn't read. She read that. We read it together hundreds of miles apart because we couldn't stop texting each other screenshots of sentences. And Luvvie, she actually peed in her pants on an airplane. That is a family story that we have now on an airplane.
That is high compliment, I must say. High compliment, okay? Like, I will take it, okay? I will take it.
Yeah, we adore you.
You do so much, and I always ask my guests, like, what did you actually want to be when you were little, Glennon? When you were growing up, what was, like, the goal in your head?
Yeah, I wanted to be a teacher. Both of my parents were educators. Yeah, my whole life I wanted to be a teacher. My mom was a teacher. My dad was a teacher and then a principal and a coach. I never considered anything other than teaching. I still do think it was the most important, noble profession. That was always my goal. And I did become a teacher after college. I was taught 3rd grade for 6 years at a Title I school right outside of D.C. And I had the most amazing class of most of the kids were recent immigrants.
So how did you go from 3rd grade teacher to New York Times bestselling author? Like, what was that jump?
Well, so I got knocked up and got sober and got married, all in like the same hot minute, okay? I found out I was pregnant. Oh, God. Well, let's see. My kid's 15, so it must have been about 16 years ago. And at the time, I was just a really, really serious alcoholic. I was one of those functional alcoholics, which is why I was able to still teach. And I think sometimes being a functional alcoholic is worse because you can just keep going forever, you know, and slowly die. So anyway, I found out I was pregnant, got sober the day I found out I was pregnant, got married, and then was home. I just stayed home with these kids. I had 3 really fast. And I started going to recovery meetings at the same time to stay sober. And Luvvie, I just would sit in these recovery meetings and think, these are the first honest people I've ever met. Like, this is church, right? Like, this is how life should be done. Like, people just sit around in circles. They have to act shiny and happy and perfect all day. And then they come to these basements and they can freaking be honest about how hard all of this is and tell the truth, you know? And so it made me mad that, like, you could only be that truthful in those basements. And I just kept thinking, why can't we be this way all the time? This is why people are dying of quiet desperation all the time, because we're always so fake about everything. So I started getting up really early and just writing. Well, you know this. You don't really have 2 different voices. Like, you are who you are.
Yeah.
That's not how everyone is.
Right.
But you are who you are, and you're writing publicly as you are privately, right?
Right.
So I started writing with that voice that would speak at AA meetings. Just like brutally and completely honest. And the cool thing about recovery meetings is that it's not just that people are brave enough to tell their real stories there, but there are rules about how to receive other people's stories and truths. So, you know, I mean, we don't know how to handle each other's stories.
Right.
Like, all we do is just tell people they can't have their feelings and they can't argue. But that doesn't happen at recovery meetings because there are rules about how to receive stories. So the idea behind the blog I started was, I'm going to be brave enough to tell my truth. And I'm also just going to be kind enough to hear other people's truths the way we do in meetings. So my goal just became to turn the whole world into an AA meeting. And that's what I've been trying to do.
And
then a couple posts went viral, and then the whole book thing happened. And you know how that goes. It's just a whirlwind.
It's, you know what, that kind of just like has me pausing, like turning the whole world into an AA meeting. Like, wow, that's deep.
Yeah.
Because imagine what it would be like if we were all able to be vulnerable about our real stories, like all the stuff that's off limits. Like, you've talked about addiction, religion, infidelity. You talk about all this stuff. How do you decide what to include and what to exclude when you're sharing your story?
Yeah, well, I've learned this, I think, the hard way a few times. I have a friend, Nadia. She says that art is best done when we are speaking from our scars and not our open wounds. And I think, like, with this, you are completely in it. This era of truth-telling, you know, of vulnerability and truth-telling. I think that sometimes we do a disservice to people because people think from our work that, oh, okay, so the answer is just to put it all out there all the time. And, like, then I'll be less lonely and then the world will understand me. But that's not how we do it, right? Like, Love Warrior was about the infidelity and breakup of my marriage. And it's written like in a very raw, vulnerable way that makes people think it's right here, it's right now, this is her pain. But I wrote that years after it happened, right? So it's like when you tell the truth, when you put it out there, before you've mined the pain that you've had for gold, right? Before you've sat with it long enough to find what's universal in it instead of what's just personal.
Yes.
It reads as a cry for help as opposed to service, right? Art always has to be kind of a service. So when my pain is like super fresh and I'm in it and I'm stupid about it, I'm sharing with like my people, my therapist, my good friends and my family. And then later, when I've got some perspective from it, when I can see how my personal pain is universal and like, you know, I really think that our personal pain, if we sit with it long enough, it is kind of an alchemy, right? Like it does turn into wisdom. I think artists, that's why I could never be who I am in the world if I was still drinking. And I know that many people do, and it works out for them. But for me, drinking was an escape from pain. And for me, most of my wisdom comes from sitting in pain. So it wouldn't work for me if I were still drinking.
So the idea of our
But
pain as universal is actually like legit a point to hone in on. Because a lot of times we'll find out after the fact, right? When we share and people are like, oh my God, I went through that too. And you're like, oh snap, this is a universal issue.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the point of memoir. That's why there's a difference between memoir and biography. Like, this isn't just what happened to me. This is what happened in my life that I've looked at through a lens that is like, how is this thing that happened to me about all of us? And when I can do that, I know that it's time to share. And before I can do that, I think it's not.
That's interesting. When people, I don't think I've lived a life that's interesting enough for a memoir, and you've written like 2 essentially. I'm like,
it's been a doozy. It's been a doozy.
I'm like, Lord, I don't think I have memoir experiences, but I try to be self-reflective in the moment. So we were on the Together tour together last year. And one of the things that we started the show off with you and Abby Wambach, your wife, telling the story about how you essentially came to build this love story. And it's interesting because that story is incredible. That's the one thing I don't share online is my love life. That's the one boundary that I have is I never bring people into that piece because I think it's a sacred piece for me that's like, you know what, I'm going to keep this to myself. What gives you the courage to write about the most intimate piece of your life in that way?
Well, let me say in response to that I think it's really wise that you're doing that. I think that when I look back on my marriage with Craig, that most of our marriage I was writing. So I was blogging. Much of our marriage is in the first book. Love Warrior is completely about our marriage. And that marriage ended and should have ended. That was the right thing for both of us and has turned out to really just free both of us. And our family is different but beautiful and everything is exactly as it should be. But I do, when I look back on it, have great empathy for him being married to me during that time. Because I think it's like when you're in a marriage and the other person is constantly mining your relationship for what is personal but is also universal about this, but I can share it with the world. Like, it feels like a violation. Like, there are some things that if you let them out the door, you don't get to keep them. Right? And I think that Craig probably often felt like more of a case study than a husband, right? And that it was probably very hard to be completely vulnerable when you know that you're being studied, that your relationship is being studied. So the real reason why Abby and I decided to tell our story on Stage It Together is because, and I've never told anyone this before, is because it's almost like a matter of, we both talk about truth telling. And for me, telling the truth about things at the right time in the right way is not just a work thing, it's a sobriety thing, right? So I have to. When I have something inside of me that makes me feel, because if we lie about things, it's because we felt shame about them. And for my sobriety, I'm not allowed to have shame. Right? So better for me shame takes me down. So as does all addicts, as it does, I think, everyone. So better for me to get it out and make everybody uncomfortable and work through it than to keep it secret inside of me, because that's just like the kiss of death for me. So when I was going through all of the marriage breakup and falling in love with Abby, the way that was the right way to present that to the world was in a different chronology than it actually happened. So, for example, my marriage fell apart 6 weeks, I think, before my memoir about the redemption of my marriage was about to launch.
Right. Great timing,
Luvvie.
Glennon. Great timing.
I mean, we can't, and Oprah, by the way, was launching it. It was the Oprah Book Club, the first, so here I am, the truth teller alongside you, sorry, this is my life right now. What do you expect me to do? Go on tour and lie to people?
Right.
Like, I never promised to be perfect. I just promised to be honest. So my people can handle this. Like, it's inconvenient for the launch, to say the least. But I would much rather commit career suicide than soul suicide, right? And because, every editor and agent was like, look, people are going to buy this because they think, it'll save their marriages. And if your marriage is over, our entire launch is over also. So listen, Luvvie, everybody told me I couldn't tell people that my marriage was over. So guess who I called? Oprah.
Oprah.
I called Oprah and I was like, listen, everyone's telling me I can't tell the truth about this. And she was like, oh, yes, you will tell the truth. Of course you will. And the truth is what stands at the end. So we will start with it now. So, of course, the second that you call everybody back and said, oh, well, Oprah said I can, then everybody on earth's like, oh, well, you know what? We also think that's a good idea. Yes.
Right.
Right. So I did. I revealed that my marriage was over weeks before, but then I didn't reveal the relationship with Abby until months after, which of course was the right thing to do because our relationship was so new, like putting it out into the world would have been utterly horrible for our family. My children were just getting used to it. But the truth of the matter was that I met Abby before I was divorced. So I always felt like I did that right. I revealed the truth to everyone in the way that was correct for my family.
Yeah.
But I always felt like I owed my people the whole story of how it went down. And so that's why we did that in the introduction of Together, because the people that came to that event were my people. Like the people who had been with me from the beginning. And I felt like I owed them the whole truth and I knew that they could handle it. So that's what we did. And then it was done. And everybody was fine and everyone lived.
Everybody lived. And what's interesting is you as a blogger, because it's funny because you started this Mama's Dairy and you built this audience of a lot of like really conservative Christian women. So I want people to understand how huge that is. Because this woman who was married with 3 kids, who looked blonde, blue eyes, looked just like them, they thought she was just like them, 15 years later is now like, hey, by the way, you guys, I'm divorcing my husband and I am going to marry the woman who I've fallen in love with.
Yeah.
You did the thing that people are afraid to do. You blew up every piece of expectation.
Yeah. So that's just what keeps happening, Luvvie. I don't know. I mean, first of all, the people who were at Mama's Dairy, so the 10 years before that, I had been an outspoken Christian supporter of the LGBTQ community. So, like, this had always been a platform that, I mean, one of my most shared pieces is called A Mountain I'm Willing to Die On that I wrote a decade ago about my stand on gay people in the church and how the only way forward was inclusion and all of that. So, as a matter of fact, Luvvie, so it was actually a letter to my son, like a hypothetical letter that I'd written to my son about if he ever told us he was gay. And somebody sent me, this makes me want to cry, but somebody sent, after I came out with the news about Abby and the internet exploded for a little while, one of my readers sent me that letter in an email to me, but had changed the word Chase to Glennon. So the whole letter was written to me from me. I mean, it was so beautiful. So the point of this is the community that I had been building over time, we had always been based on fierce inclusion and love. So while they were shocked, there was nothing new about that way forward. And I remember standing with our friend Jen Hatmaker and telling her for the first time. And she has a Christian community, but very different than mine. And she said, God, it's like you've been creating the community that you would one day need.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And that's why it works, Luvvie, because my kids, the divorce was hard for them, but they sure as hell didn't have to unlearn any bullshit about gay people when Abby came into my life.
Right.
That's the terrible thing. When suddenly you're forced to you're forced into inclusion, and then you haven't done the work beforehand with your own family before it affected you.
Yep.
So then you have to have this family unlearn everything, and none of it's legit, right? So, I mean, my kids have been to more gay pride parades than Abby had. Okay, and she's like the gayest gay that ever gayed. So my kids were like, all right, that's cool, you know, but I don't know. I mean, I think like right now it's so important to not be a part. And I have left churches, and I think I left 8 churches before I found one that I felt like was centered enough on inclusivity and social justice for me to even bring my family to it. So we didn't have to change anything. We didn't have to change any of our friends. We didn't have to change our church. And that's why it makes me crazy when people stay in institutions that aren't good enough just because out of laziness.
Well, out of laziness and this intense need to belong against all odds, even if it means in spite of yourself. It's the... And this is why we have to be committed to fighting for people whose lives might not resemble ours, because our lives could quickly resemble theirs. You know, it's like the person who's racist who all of a sudden now has a black daughter-in-law. Like, how that gonna work? You know what I mean? So it's if you were doing the work before, you won't have to make these massive life adjustments. But it was still huge because I remember when this dropped, people acted like you just blew up the world. And like just the utter surprise. And I think, again, it comes down to you've already been doing the work. And which is why one thing I really appreciate about you is the fact that you continue to do the work. I have to say, in the last 2-3 years, with everything that's been happening in the news and things are more public and things are happening more, it's hard to look around and believe that white women have anybody's best interest in mind. There have been a couple of times when I've looked around where I'm like, damn, like, what are they doing? And sometimes, for those of us with white women friends, sometimes you have to step back like, is she here for me or no? And I appreciate that you constantly speak up. Because one thing I always say is I need people with platforms to not be ambiguous about their support for Black and brown people. And you haven't been, especially after this whole Trumpness. So, oh God, like the whole thing just pisses me off. So and when people are like, oh my God, white people are blah, blah, blah. Honestly, people like you and Jen Hatmaker give me the hope that if you guys exist, then you can help breed other people like you. Like, you can help create other people who can think like you. You were quoted as saying this to white women who only became active in social justice work after Trump's election. What sucks is that it took us being personally affected to finally show up. We cannot show up for the movement and say, here we are, until we say, we are so damn sorry it took so long. And so when white women say to me, how do I lead? Where do I begin? I say, you do not lead and you don't begin anything. The fight for civil rights is not new. We're just new to it. How have people been coming to you with that? Like, what is your audience doing?
Well, I think right now, I mean, it's taken me a while to find, you know that scripture that's like, we have to work out your own faith with fear and trembling. I feel like that's how I feel about this. It's like finding your place in the racial justice area. You just got to do it with a lot of fear and trembling. Like, and I found that it's very individual, and it looks really different to me right now than it did when I started the journey. And I think like what I figured out is that my jobs right now are to talk to white women about white supremacy and like ask the right questions of them, you know? I mean, I think I think white people are asking the wrong question right now. The question is, are you a racist? Are you racist? To me, that's not the question anymore. I mean, the question is, do you care enough to become educated about the history of our country? Right? That's it. Like, what I see, my mom just came to visit me this week, Luvvie, and I come downstairs this morning, or in the morning, and she's just sitting down at our couch, and she's got all of these books about Jim Crow, and some of them are kids' books, right? And one of them is Michelle Alexander's book, and she's got pages and pages of notes, and she's just learning. Like, she's just desperately trying to learn. And I think this so much has to do with education. I feel like right now, our friend Latham Thomas just talked about, what did she call it? Optical allyship. Everybody's so concerned with saying the right thing that none of us are becoming the right thing, right? And like the work for white people, the problem is that it's days and hours and months of learning. It's not about like, I just read this quote about, okay, you can tell if you're carrying a mug of coffee and you get bumped, coffee will spill out. If you're carrying a mug of tea and you get bumped, tea will spill out. And what I feel like is happening with white people is they're trying to say the right thing, and what's coming out of them is not the right thing because they haven't been doing the work of educating themselves about the history of this country. And when you do that work, it changes who you are. You don't have to worry about saying the right thing. You will say the right thing because you have become the right thing, which is like utterly infuriated and humbled and kind of motivated, but with a real deep sense of, I guess it's humility. I don't know. And so this is what I see happening when a white person like says something on social media and it's not right. And then she gets bumped. Okay. Like a black woman will come and say, no, that's not no. And then she's bumped, right? So then what comes out is, oh, I got attacked. Well, you wrote the beautiful article about white tears. So that's what I mean. Like we get bumped, the tears come. And when I see white women get bumped and then the wrong thing spills out of them, I know they didn't do the work. And I think that's what pisses me off and makes me sad, I should say, because I know that that's what my black friends are seeing too. And that's what pisses people off who are doing the work.
Right.
You can see it. You can see it in the response. Oh, you're just trying to say the right thing, but you haven't done any of the underground work that makes you become the right thing.
And we need
so
more
that when
people
you
to
get
become
bumped,
the right thing.
Yeah, so that when you get bumped, I say the wrong thing all the time. And then I'm corrected, and I am like, oh, God, that's right. Like, if you're doing the work as a white person, nothing comes out except, like, utter shit and humility and let me try again.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So, I don't know. My work is that. My work is, I think, trying to get, I was with a group of, so usually, I'll be at a event and there'll be 800 people there, and I often speak at churches, there'll be 5 black women there, right? With 795 white women.
Yeah.
And I always think of one of my favorite ideas about churches where we go to make comfortable people uncomfortable and to make uncomfortable people comfortable. So when I look out at the crowd and I see the 5 black women there, I think, wow, that must be a little bit weird to come to this event and see this audience. And so I always think, okay, my job is to make those 5 women comfortable here, even if the other 795 are really uncomfortable. So the words that come out of my mouth better make those women feel like they are in exactly the right, safe place. And we have really hard conversations, we had a conversation last week at a big white church in, I think it was in Dallas. And, somebody stood up and said something about Martin Luther King. And I said, yeah, like, that's great. We are all really big fans of Martin Luther King. Like,
right.
We love us some Martin Luther King. And I said, that's because it is much easier to love a dead civil rights activist than it is to love an alive one, because the dead one is no threat to our status quo. So, I think shifting the conversation for white people, like, the question is not, are you a fan of Martin Luther King Jr. right now? Because that won't even tell you whether you would have been a fan of Martin Luther King Jr. back then. Right. Don't tell me how you feel about Martin Luther King Jr. right now. Tell me how you feel about Colin Kaepernick now.
Okay. Let him know. Let them
Because
know.
that is an indicator of how you would have felt about Martin Luther King. Don't tell me how you feel about the Freedom Riders right now.
Right.
Tell me how you feel about Black Lives Matter right now.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yes.
And so
Yes.
that's the indicator of those questions. And look, I would say always a few people leave, right? But people, if nobody leaves, you're not telling the truth. If you're sitting in a group of 900 white people and you're talking about race and nobody leaves, then you just didn't say enough, right?
See,
So,
that's what I'm saying. See, Glennon be out
yeah.
here, okay? Just out here. And I need more people like you who use these massive platforms to rock people's worlds with the truth. Like, rock it. And I'm just like, honestly, we're at an interesting time in our nation's history where I think white women especially are getting the mirror turned to them. To have to kind of face what's been happening. So I appreciate your presence as this person who's standing in the gap and being like, yo, there was recently a piece about you in Ink. Was that the cut that I was quoted in? Because after one of our Together tour things, they came backstage and I said, Glennon is like a Trojan horse, right? You see this white woman who's like adorable, tiny, like blonde hair, and then they probably expecting you to come through and spew some Becky shit. And then you get up there and you're like, are you supporting Colin? I'm like, boom, let him know, okay? It's the Trojan horse. It's necessary. So I just wanted to thank you for that work. And you have been working on an organization called Together Rising, right? So what are you guys up to now? The Love Flash Mobs? Are y'all still doing that?
Yeah. So, I mean, we're just trying to use these projects to teach. I don't know. We just finished one about, what we now call the opioid crisis. I mean, Luvvie, it's so amazing. All of these like social projects that we go into just become a complete lesson in it's all racial.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. It's all of it. And so even the opioid crisis thing became this huge way for us to translate the difference between the language that's used to describe, now it's called the opioid crisis because it's white people, but of course it was called the war on drugs when it was Black people.
Right.
So of course, if you have a crisis, you have victims. If you have war, you have enemies to fight.
Mm-hmm.
So as a person who's obsessed with language, that has been amazing for me to start studying, like the ways that we use language to control people's emotions to different groups of people, right? So anyway, we finished up opioid. We're figuring out now. We're working with some people in Flint right now. I think our next effort will be Flint. God help us if our country's response to Flint. And then we're actually going to work in some Native American reservations coming up. But yeah, we're basically just, the idea is to kind of create a groundswell of educated activists.
Okay.
So we do Love Flash Mobs probably twice a year that address something domestically or internationally, and we educate during we present it in a way that educates people about that issue. And then we collect money for a project that we're doing in that place. And the cool thing is that nobody is allowed to give more than $25 because we want it to really be democratized. So, I think we're close to $10 million for internationally and domestically. And the average donation is $40. So even with bigger donations that people make, it's just a complete and total groundswell effort of people who actually do care, and super hopeful to me right now in this Trump era where it feels like all is going straight to hell.
And then one of my favorite things to ask every guest is, so as you're doing all of this stuff and being this person, what are you doing to take care of yourself? What's your self-care stuff?
So Luvvie, last night I'm going to bed and I'm like, Abby, Luvvie's going to ask me what I do for self-care. So can you tell me? She turned off the TV and she's like, okay, let's think about it. Okay. So I'll just answer off the cuff, Luvvie, like I haven't even considered this before.
At all.
Well, what Abby brought up to me was one that I'm the most boundaried person that she knows. So I have about probably 5 or 6 people that I love very much that I let super, super, super close to me. And then I love the rest of humanity from a distance. Like, I love humanity, but actual human beings are really hard for me. So, so big ass boundaries. My great loves, I always say, are Abby, my kids, and boundaries. And then also, I think from sobriety, I learned that big thinking doesn't work for me. So in other words, like asking myself, how do I have a good life, will never work. But asking myself, how do I have a good day, works. So because, that Annie Dillard, like how we spend our days is how we spend our lives. So one thing that Abby and I talked about last night that I do is that a long time ago, I figured out, okay, there are only about 5 things that are super important to me. So that would be my kids and Abby and my work, my output, my creative output, and then my input. So like what I'm learning, and my body, like keeping physical things strong, and rest. Rest is super important to me. So all I do is I figure out what I value, and then I divide my day up into those things. And it becomes very simple. And like what I learn is that if I'm leaving one out, I feel cranky and upset. And it's always that. Like I'll start to feel a little empty. And it's because I haven't like really connected with the kids that day. Or I'll start to feel anxious and I realize it's because I didn't make anything that day. Like even if it's just a paragraph, even if it's, I don't know, what a cool Facebook post, like I have to make something. My friend Liz Gilbert says, I have to be constructing something or I'll start to get destructive. That's completely the story of my life. If I start to feel a little empty, maybe I didn't like creatively put anything in my brain. Like I have to be reading something, listening to your podcast, whatever. Each day it has to be something new going into my mind. So I think just like figuring out what you value, dividing your day up into those things, and then the idea of like whatever you ignore will go away. Like if you don't make time for one of the time doesn't match your values, that thing will disappear. Zadie Smith said, how we spend our time is how we spend our love.
Ooh, that's good.
I love that so much. I mean, that's what we've got. We've got time. So think of the 6 things that matter to us and divide your day up that way. And then the last thing is I feel like everything that I know about self-care came from sobriety. And I think that one thing Abby brought up with me last night is that I try to live with a lot of integrity. And to me, that doesn't mean like doing the right thing at all. It just means like integrated. So what I do on the outside or say on the outside matches what's going on the inside. Because I lived as an alcoholic for so long, and that's a double life completely because you're always pretending you're one thing, but you're suffering on the inside. And so if my feelings are hurt or I'm angry or I'm confused about something someone said, I say it all the time.
Yep.
All the time. And it's kind of annoying. Like it's like really you can't just, it causes more small, annoying confrontations and much less, I have much fewer deep, hurtful, long-seated confrontations, right? Because it's like constantly, like, what did you mean by that? Hold on, I don't understand that. That pissed me off. Like, and I do it all the time, like with Abby and my sister, and it's an interesting way of life because everything gets taken care of right away.
Yep.
And I was listening to this because most of the time it's a failure to communicate, right? It's not. Yeah. But when you eat it and swallow it, all these little bitterness and resentments build up. And over time, it's like cancer for relationships. So I was reading this article recently that said that you would think that one of the indicators of good marriages is not fighting, but actually one of the indicators of good marriages, the psychologist said, is people who are constantly saying, wait, what? Like
Right.
a million little things clears the air.
Facts. Yes. You see, just dropping all the gems. And you don't need to necessarily go to the spa when you have your boundaries together so people aren't constantly coming at your head.
Oh, totally. Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah. Just create it. We call it, I told you about this. Like, Abby and I, we call it our island. Like, we create our island, and we surround it by a moat with alligators in it. and nobody is allowed on the island who doesn't celebrate our relationship and our family with anything but absolute acceptance and love. And the good news is, like, we don't ever feel like we have to convince anybody to do that. Mm-hmm. Either do it and you can come, or go on your way, right?
That's it.
Like, we're not arguing with anybody. We're not begging for acceptance. We're not begging for belonging. We let our drawbridge down when people already have that. Mm-hmm. And when they don't, we just assume that they weren't meant for us, right? But we don't spend our life begging anybody to love us.
Ooh, and that is a bomb way to wrap it. Glennon, you are the bomb. Thank you so much for joining Rants and Randomness.
Luvvie, you're a queen. I just adore you so much. I'll follow every word you say forever.
I love you. Come visit me in Chicago.
I will.
Bye.
Bye, friends.
Shout out to Glennon Doyle for joining me. She's incredible. And please follow her on social media. She's at Glennon Doyle on all pieces of social media. And that's GLENNONDOYLE everywhere. And her books, Carry On Warrior and Love Warrior, are available wherever books are sold. Much love to Chicago Recording Company for partnering with me on this. And as always, subscribe to Rants and Randomness on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, wherever you prefer to get it. And please rate it. Also, definitely share with your friends. Let them know that Rants and Randomness is about that life. You know what I mean? Go ahead, pass the wealth around. Follow the podcast on social media too. So Rants and Randomness has its own Twitter account now. It's Rants Randomness without the and. Okay? And on Instagram, it's Rants and Randomness. Now, I get a lot of questions in my messages, and I think a lot of them would be good to answer on this podcast because they're so universal. So if you'd like to send me a question that would possibly be answered on here, email me at luvvierants@gmail.com. That's LUVVIERANTS@gmail.com. As always, follow me on social media. I am at Luvvie everywhere. And see you on the next episode.